Let's talk a little bit about the home and family in 1890s Philadelphia. We're going to hear about some ugly elements from slavery that crept in, but we're also going to hear about some positive values that certain classes of Negroes lived by, which could have been good examples for the rest of the Negroes. So pay attention as we continue our studies in the 1899 book titled The Philadelphia Negro by Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. Among the masses of the Negro people in America, the monogamic home is comparatively a new institution, not more than 2 or 3 generations old. Most Negroes knew about multiple partners in relationships rather than only one. This was a new institution for them, having only 2 or 3 generations of experience at the time of his writing. The Africans were taken from polygamy and transplanted into a plantation where the home life was protected only by the caprice of the master, and practically unregulated polygamy and polyandry was the result on the plantations of the West Indies. The African ancestors of Negroes practiced a structured and socially regulated form of polygamy. But when they were brought into slavery, especially in the West Indies, this system was destroyed and replaced by wild and unregulated polygamy and polyandry, based on the needs of the slave master. This is what he's saying. In states like Pennsylvania, the marriage institution among slaves was early established and maintained. Consequently, one meets among the Philadelphia Negroes the result of both systems, the looseness of plantation life and the strictness of Quaker teaching. The Quaker teachings emphasized strict moral behavior. It didn't permit people to be promiscuous. Some of the Negroes in Pennsylvania were brought up under these values and didn't share the loose values of the plantation life. And what largely determined which set of values the Negroes embodied? It was their background and their upbringing, right? You see, all humans can express any archetype. Just because a person looks a certain way doesn't mean they're predetermined to act a certain way. If you take a person with rich brown skin from America and raise them from a youngster in China, what do you think is going to happen? Are they going to grow up with American values, culture, and accent and worldview? No. They're going to grow up speaking, acting, and sharing the values of Chinese people. And vice versa if the roles were reversed. This goes into the importance of training kids when they're most impressionable to help mold their character in ways that set them up for better success in life. Because a kid raised around slave values is likely going to express those as an adult, right? That shouldn't be a surprise. But take the same kid and raise him or her in the Quaker values, then they would likely embody those instead. You see? That's how among Negroes in Philadelphia, Dr. Du Bois saw both influences. Among the lowest class of recent immigrants and other unfortunates, there is much sexual promiscuity and the absence of a real home life. These recent immigrants are referring to Negroes coming into the city from the country. And the unfortunates are the other Negroes in the lower realms that weren't doing so well. They were the ones who were sexually loose and didn't have stable homes. Actual prostitution for gain is not as widespread as would at first thought seem natural. On the other hand, there are 2 widespread systems among the lowest classes, viz., temporary cohabitation and the support of men. Temporary cohabitation, which is men and women living together for a certain period without being formally married, that's one system. And the other system was women supporting men who worked very little or they didn't work at all. Cohabitation of a more or less permanent character is a direct offshoot of the plantation life and is practiced considerably. This is a practice that came from slavery, and a lot of people do it. That's what he's talking about. And although marriage wasn't recognized legally, many of these unions did last a long time, and sometimes a lifetime, as Dr. Du Bois has discussed earlier in the book. But his point here is that this is a continued slave custom. In distinctly slum districts like that at 7th and Lombard, from 10 to 25% of the unions are of this nature. Some of them are simply common law marriages and are practically never broken, because people can obviously become life partners without signing a piece of paper, just as marriages can easily split apart after legalizing a marriage. The life of the relationship is not predetermined by its formality or informality. Others are compacts, which last for 2 to 10 years, others for some months. In most of these cases, the women are not prostitutes, but rather ignorant and loose. Women using bad judgment when selecting partners, and they were driven too much by the sexual impulses. In such cases, there is, of course, little home life, rather a sort of neighborhood life, centering in the alleys and on the sidewalks, where the children are educated, meaning where the children learn to form these habits from the people that came before them. Because again, the young ages are when the children are molded the most, and that's when their value system begins to take shape and form. So what they see at these ages becomes internalized, and it grows within them like a seed growing into a plant. The streets become their teachers, and the streets prepare children for the streets. Of the great mass of Negroes, this class forms a very small percentage and is absolutely without social standing. This class refers to the sexually loose and the cohabiting segment that frequently switches partners. This class is a very small percentage and has no real recognition within the broader community. That's what he's talking about. They were at the very bottom of the pit in the black community. They are the dregs which indicate the former history and the dangerous tendencies of the masses. They are the leftover products of slavery, and their behavior reflects that damaged past. They represent what many other blacks could become without guidance and structure in place. Right? This is wild, isn't it? The system of supporting men is one common among the prostitutes of all countries, and widespread among the Negro women of the town. 2 little colored girls walking along South Street stopped before a gaudy pair of men's shoes displayed in a shop window, and one said,
"That's the kind of shoes I'd buy my fellow."
The remark fixed their life history. They were from among the prostitutes of Middle Alley or Ratcliffe Street, or some similar resort, where each woman supports some man from the results of her gains. The majority of the well-dressed loafers whom one sees on Locust Street near 9th, on Lombard near 7th and 17th, on 12th near Cater, and in other such localities are supported by prostitutes and political largesse and spend their time in gambling. These were the men that could talk real good. They were skilled with the spoken word. They had a lot of charisma and knew how to tell women what they wanted to hear when they wanted to hear it. They could manipulate the emotions of women to get what they needed from them, which was money, while they spent their time on the streets gambling like adult children. And when the prostitutes weren't giving them the money, they made it by working with whichever corrupt politician needed their service. They are absolutely without home life and form the most dangerous class in the community, both for crime and political corruption. You see? They are the ones that gave black marks to 7th and Lombard and other parts of the 7th Ward. Leaving the slums and coming to the great mass of the Negro population, we see undoubted effort has been made to establish homes, meaning trying to have a stable family and overcome the relationship issues they had inherited from slavery. He says the great mass, meaning most of the Negroes in the 7th Ward, were on this frequency. 2 great hindrances, however, cause much mischief: the low wages of men and the high rents. The low wages of men make it necessary for mothers to work, and in numbers of cases to work away from home several days in the week. This leaves the children without guidance or restraint for the better part of the day, a thing disastrous to manners and morals. Because what do kids do when left to themselves with little guidance? They start exploring and discovering the many paths that exist within the realm of existence. And sometimes the paths they run into aren't the best for them in the long term. During this time in the 7th Ward, what path could these unattended children easily run into? The path that was trodden by the loafers, prostitutes, and gamblers. The people that many of these children would have seen while their parents were away from home working. That's how this could be disastrous to manners and morals. To this must be added the result of high rents, namely the lodging system, which is subrenting rooms in a home. Whoever wishes to live in the center of Negro population, near the great churches and near work, must pay high rent for a decent house. And most of the Negroes couldn't afford to pay those rents. So they would have had to sub-rent other rooms to strangers if they wanted to be nearer to the church. And what Negroes wouldn't want to be nearer to the church? A lot of them did. But to do so, they would have to lodge with other people, which I think is a great thing, especially for people trying to come up and make it in the world. But it's only good if you're familiar with the people you're lodging with. Many of the Negroes had to live with other Negroes who were complete strangers. And Dr. Du Bois says that this was a dangerous thing for homes with children. The lodgers are often waiters who are at home between meals, at the very hours when the housewife is off at work, and growing daughters are thus left unprotected. What person wants a strange man in their house alone with their growing daughter? In some cases, though this is less often, servant girls and other females are taken, meaning brought into the house as a lodger instead of a man. In such ways, the privacy and intimacy of home life is destroyed, and elements of danger and demoralization admitted. You have to remember, they're dealing with Negroes who were extra wobbly in the mind at that time, not too far removed from slavery, coming from the country in these different states. So they never knew the character of the person who was lodging with them, or what type of influence they would have on their children. Many families see this and refuse to take lodgers and move where they can afford the rent without help. Some families weren't having it at all. They were out of there. It was too risky dealing with the wobbly-minded, so they would just move somewhere else where they could afford to live off their own income. This involves more deprivations to a socially ostracized race like the Negro than to whites, since it often means hostile neighbors or no social intercourse. Living close to the whites meant hostile neighbors and also meant being very distant from the black community. But that was the price of admission if they didn't want to lodge with the others or pay high rents. If a number of Negroes settle together, the real estate agents dump undesirable elements among them, which some enthusiastic association has driven from the slums, which is what they did when they dispersed the 5th Ward slums. There was an area occupied in the 7th Ward by good Negro families, and then the real estate agents began renting out homes in the neighborhood to the undesirables, which created black marks in those areas. You see? This goes back to the statement that Dr. Du Bois made earlier in the book about how the whites viewed the Negroes as all the same type of people. That's why they placed the undesirables anywhere groups of Negroes lived. There are a large number of waiters, porters, and servant girls in the city who naturally have no home life and are exposed to peculiar temptations. The church is the rallying place of the best class of these young people, and it attempts to furnish their amusements. Loafing and promenading the streets is the only other entertainment most of these young folks have. They form a serious problem, to which the lodging system is the only attempted answer, and that a dangerous one. Homes and clubs properly conducted ought to be open for them. A young men's Christian association, which would not degenerate into an endless prayer meeting, might meet the wants of the young men. He's talking about to keep the young men from being idle on the streets. There needs to be more Christian social programs that don't take up so much time praying, but rather give the young men something productive to do. The home life of the middle laboring class lacks many of the pleasant features of good homes. Traces of plantation customs still persist, and there is a widespread custom of seeking amusement outside the home. Thus, the home becomes a place for a hurried meal now and then, and lodging. Only on Sundays does the general gathering in the front room, the visits and leisurely dinners smack of proper home life. Nevertheless, the spirit of home life is steadily growing. Nearly all the housewives deplore the lodging system and the work that keeps them away from home, and there is a widespread desire to remedy these evils and the other evil which is akin to them, the allowing of children and young women to be out unattended at night. So the community had a desire to deal with this problem. People saw what was happening and predicted where it could end up if allowed to continue. Some of the solutions for them was reducing the involvement in the lodging system and women reducing the type of work that kept them away from home, especially for extended periods of time. In the better class families, there is a pleasant family life of distinctly Quaker characteristics. The better class had respectable morals and values, which is key to being qualified as the better class. Don't let American society fool you into believing that making a lot of money is the standard for being the better class, because that's a lie. The number one quality is the inner character. Everything else is secondary. So the better class families of the Negroes had Quaker characteristics, which involved disciplined behavior and moral uprightness. One can go into such homes in the 7th Ward and find all the quiet comfort and simple good-hearted fare that one would expect among well-bred people. In some cases, the homes are lavishly furnished. In others, they are homely and old-fashioned. Even in the best homes, however, there is easily detected a tendency to let the communal church and society life trespass upon the home, meaning church was taking up too much time away from home. From his view, he didn't see a good church-home balance. The church weighed way more on the scale. There are fewer strictly family gatherings than would be desirable, fewer simple neighborhood gatherings and visits. In their place are the church teas, the hall concerts, or the elaborate parties given by the richer and more ostentatious. These things are of no particular moment to the circle of families involved, but they set an example to the masses which may be misleading. Too much time was spent on concerts and flashy parties instead of cultivating home life and spending time with the immediate family. Dr. Du Bois saw this as not setting a proper example for others who were trying to climb up the ladder. It sent the wrong message that status and showmanship were more important than home and family life. The mass of the Negro people must be taught sacredly to guard the home, to make it the center of social life and moral guardianship. Most Negroes need to be taught that the home is where morals, values, and habits are passed on to the next generation. This it is largely among the best class of Negroes, but it might be made even more conspicuously so than it is. He's saying the better class of Negroes already understand and do this, but they could do a better job making the examples more obvious and known for the rest of the Negroes. Such emphasis undoubtedly means the decreased influence of the Negro church, and that is a desirable thing. Less church and more home and family is what he saw as best. The church took up too much time and money that could have been spent in these other places. On the whole, the Negro has few family festivals. Birthdays are not often noticed. Christmas is a time of church and general entertainments. Thanksgiving is coming to be widely celebrated, but here again in churches as much as in homes. The home was destroyed by slavery, struggled up after emancipation, and is again not exactly threatened, but neglected in the life of city Negroes. Herein lies food for thought. So let's eat on that food as we wrap up and continue to the next commentary. I thank you for your time and attention. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.